Welcome to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast, empowering you to take a whole person approach to your well-being, spirit, soul, and body. Join me, your host, Dr. Ana Lara, naturopathic doctor, entrepreneur, and a servant of Jesus Christ. We are not just a body, we are spirit and soul. It's time to integrate medicine and spirituality into our healing. Let's get started. Welcome back to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ana Lara. Today, I want to talk about something that is a personal, something that I was dealing with personally. And because of this experience, I have actually seen a lot of patients coming through my office since then. And that's talking about the invisible aftermath of after having experienced a concussion, how concussions and traumatic brain injuries rewire your mind, your brain, and how emotions and behavior are changed after that. So let me just be clear about this. So there's obviously there's a signs and symptoms of when someone experiences a concussion or a traumatic brain injury. But when that person has actively gone through the healing, they've done maybe natural or not natural ways, physical therapies, things like that, and they heal from the concussion, there's an aftermath after having healed from the concussion that goes invisible. It goes invisible to other people in the person's life, but also for the individual. And I'm telling you from personal experience. So I've hesitated to talk about this for a while, and I knew that there would be the right time for me to make an episode on concussions. But this is really not during a concussion. This is after healing from a concussion. It really is a process. So in May of 2021, I was driving on the freeway and I was rear-ended. And, I drove a big SUV. So I got off, I looked at my vehicle, I saw a dent. And the other vehicle, it was a car, it was pretty damaged. And I thought I was fine. I did go get it adjusted by my chiropractor, got an attorney, so forth. And I'm glad that I hired that attorney and that I was going to the chiropractor. And it was actually her idea to go get an attorney, because what happened, long story short, almost 3 months went by. And without me realizing, I had a concussion. I couldn't even see for myself, in myself, the symptoms of it. I just kept going and powering through. I was struggling through that whole time. And some people would make comments, maybe in my communication, how I thought I was saying everything out loud, but only parts of my conversation was actually being expressed verbally. And so I was choppy in my conversation. And there were many other things that I just couldn't even give it attention, right? So things like, obviously the fatigue is one, but anxiety and depression, I never really struggled with it that intense. The procrastination and just feeling anxious about getting a text message, a phone call, having to respond to an email, checking my mail, everything seemed to alert my nervous system. And so it wasn't until almost 3 months after the accident that it was my chiropractor, and also a patient made a comment about maybe getting checked out for a potential concussion. And so I went and saw a neurologist, and he did all of these tests and assessments and evaluations and MRIs and all that. And then he said, "Oh yeah, you have a concussion and you have PTSD." And my response was like, no, I don't. I don't have PTSD. Maybe a concussion, but I didn't hit my head, right? I even felt I didn't hit my head. But we forget that concussions, it's not just always hitting your head on something. That severe whiplash, your brain is moving in hitting itself up against the skull, up against the back of the seat. And depending on the speed, even if it's not, it wasn't a high velocity impact, it can still cause in some people concussions. And so what the neurologist actually shared with me, he said, these types of concussions don't even get assessed or even looked at until 8 weeks after the injury, because they don't tend to show up right away, like the day or the week of the accident. So sometimes it takes a while for them to start to show up in the signs and symptoms. And I went through the process of healing, physical therapy, the chiropractic care. I did some trauma therapy and so forth. I had a colleague do some IV ozone therapy and NAD plus and some other IVs, and those helped. But what I really felt I really needed, and I could not find someone who was good, was to do the cranial sacral therapy and the neural manipulation. And I knew that would help. And though those are therapies I do for other people, it's not a therapy that I can do on myself, right? There's a lot of things in my head. You just can't do it on yourself. It's one of those, the wounded healer. You can heal everyone but yourself. It's just the way it is. And so I did find some therapists that did these cranial sacral or neural, it was cranial sacral therapists, and they weren't very good. And I found myself feeling frustrated, going to someone, I'd get the therapy and nothing. And so I kind of gave up. And what happened after about a year and a half, I felt I was, healed for the most part. But I noticed some lingering things after that. And even 2-3 years out, and here's something very interesting. There's such a thing as your nervous system remembering the anniversary of the injury. So like clockwork, every May, I would start to feel pain, headaches, a fuzziness, just the same way I felt when I had actively had the concussion. And I was like, well, I thought I healed through this, that kind of a response. I thought I healed through this. And here I am experiencing all of that. But I continued, and I finally did find someone who's good at doing the cranial sacral, the neural manipulation. And I started getting the therapies just last year, September of 2025. This is important, this timeline, because after he did the therapy, or while he did the therapy, first of all, let's start there, I noticed immediately my nervous system was activated immediately when he was working on my head. And I because I'm a therapist, I know what communication with a therapist is important of how I'm feeling. And I told him, I feel my nervous system being activated right now. And he immediately checked in and said, are you okay? He said, yeah. I told him, I want you to keep working through it. I don't want you to stop it. And he's like, okay. And he just kind of walked me through remembering I'm safe, take a deep breath, and so forth. But I could feel it in my heart. I could feel all of the nervous system responding in a way that, like I said, emotions, memories stay stuck in our body. And it was just eliciting this response. He did the therapy, and I remember it was a Friday. It rained really, really hard here in the valley that day. And I drove to the office, and I did something that alerted me, that made me self-aware of what I had done. And I know this sounds very simple to many of you, but I made a decision, a business decision, to purchase a pretty pricey equipment. And I didn't ask my husband, what do you think? Or look at this for me. I didn't ask my office assistant or anyone else for any input, which normally after the accident, I found myself constantly questioning and second guessing myself. But I didn't see it that way. I would go to someone else. What do you think about this? And I would get their feedback. And even then, I would still hesitate to make a decision. And so I would just take a long time to make decisions. It overwhelmed me. And I wasn't like that before. I was the kind of person that if I got this idea, I would run with it, make the decision. If I wanted to ask someone's opinion, I would, but I wasn't dependent on that. And after that accident, I felt like I needed many people to look at what I was about to do to make sure I was making the right decision. And so after this therapy in September of last year, I'm there looking at everything, talking to the salesperson. And I knew right then and there that I was going to make that purchase. I applied for the loan and so forth. And, you know, the guy was going to come the following Monday, bring the equipment, show it, and make sure I still wanted it. And I just was solid in my decision. There was a confidence there that I didn't have before in making a decision that big. And when I left the office Friday, I was reflecting. I'm like, oh, I didn't run this by anyone. And I know it sounds, to someone who hasn't experienced it, it seems like not a big deal. But it was a big deal to me because I immediately noticed the difference that doing the neuromanipulation therapy, how it impacted my behavior, the way that I go about making decisions. So I continued, you know, that process. And after that, that's when I realized I have acquired a lot of behaviors from having experienced that concussion that were not like me before. And there was a guilt there, and of feeling like bad about having dropped the ball in many different situations. And then going back and thinking, did people have grace for me in these times? You know, or did they just think I was being irresponsible, that I didn't care? And so I was just not doing my part, whatever it was I was doing, you know. What was interesting, my work with patients, I never felt that was impacted in my care, but the business operations, that was a different story. It was like I could not put my CEO hat on. It was too overwhelming. So when I tell you that by the grace of God, that He carried me through that journey, that process, to still be able to run a business, successful business, and do a podcast, 2 podcasts, have a Spanish podcast too, guys. And so that's where the spiritual part, I know, was that God was carrying me through spiritually to be able to physically and mentally, right, psychologically do these things. So I want to shine light on this, that if you have experienced a concussion, a traumatic brain injury, there were physical injuries, you've experienced some of those common symptoms, but now you've healed, please understand that that experience most likely reshaped your thought process, your emotions, and your behaviors. And so it doesn't matter how long you've healed. If you were never self-aware that you've acquired new behavioral patterns because of that concussion, you're going to be stuck there continuing these things. And so I want to talk about the hidden impact of concussions and TBI. So most people think that a concussion, that they think it's going to be short term. And it depends. I'm surprised there's a lot of people that are underdiagnosed when it comes to concussions and TBIs. I get now, of course, just that's the way it works. Since that accident, I get tons of people who've had injuries, and I can see the concussion. I can now sniff it out, you know, I can sense it and see it. And so now I can help them, and I know specifically what they need to do. These manual therapies are a must. They're a must, and is not physical therapy. It's the cranial sacral, it's the neuromanipulation, it's an adjustment of that, because the impact, especially if there was an impact to the head or whiplash, those structures, even if you're not hit, you know how many people I have seen, and they were in an accident, they come in, maybe they were hit on the driver's side, and their jaw, it's shifted over to the right. Their sphenoid bone also shifted to the right. So there is an impact when we're impacted, that these bones will shift over. And even if it's just a little bit, understand that there's a lot of microvascularity and nerves and structures in there that get squeezed. The brain doesn't like to be squeezed. And so if anything's off, it's going to create inflammation in the brain. It's going to change the function. The structure has changed, so the function is going to change. And when we align those structures gently, it doesn't hurt, it's very relaxing, then people will feel and heal better. And so there's herbs and many other things that you could do. We're not going to talk about that necessarily, but I want to talk about like the short-term symptoms of a concussion, right, are going to be, you know, you can have headaches, dizziness, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound, sensitivity to fragrances. You may most likely have memory issues, and it's usually the short term, the working memory, right, that you'll have a hard time. You can develop anxiety and depression. You can have fatigue physically, but cognitive, like your brain feels tired. So reading, oh my God, I could not read long. Like if someone sent me a long email, I'm like, delete. I just couldn't. If someone sent me a long text message, I just not gonna read it. And I'm an avid reader. I love to read, but I couldn't read. It was like my brain would get overwhelmed. I could read it, but my brain was getting overwhelmed. So I would avoid it. Understand the pattern here. Long email, anxiety, too overwhelming. Not going to read it. I'm going to avoid it. And so this is where I was developing this avoidance behavior, procrastination that wasn't like me, and just, not taking a look at it. And so if you looked at my emails, the unread emails, it's crazy. It's in the thousands, in text messages that went unread and unanswered, calls that I wouldn't answer, even if I knew the person. Yeah, it wasn't personal, guys. This is a trauma response, and you develop. And so what happens is that when the concussion is healed, you're healed from the inflammation, you're stuck with these behaviors, and no one's talking about it. So then you recover, right? And then what goes off that, like I said, that's unspoken, that the brain doesn't always return to its previous wiring the way you were wired before. You don't just go back to normal. Even after all these symptoms that we talked about resolve, many people are going to experience this subtle personality shift, increased irritability or emotional reactivity, anxiety or feeling overstimulated. So sound, visual sound, it could be visual stimulation, sound, or even scent. Difficulty concentrating and making decisions, changes in motivation and drive. All of these things I was experiencing. I couldn't be around, I've never been able to be around a large group of people, like loud places. I never liked it. But now it was really draining. Like if I was in church, the music and people, all of it was just too overstimulating to me. And this was 3-4 years out from the injury. And so then I would have to go home and I would just fall asleep for 3 hours. It's just that overstimulation is too much for the brain. So these changes, it's not something you're imagining. You're not a bad person. It's not just stress. It is a result of the neurobiology adaptation. Your brain, your nervous system adapted to what you were experiencing throughout that concussion. And your brain rewires itself, right, to cope with that. It adapted to that circumstance, that situation. That became your new norm. So my new norm was, don't read the email. That's too long. And I would tell people, if you send me a long email, I'm not going to read it. You better get on a phone call with me. Don't send me a long text message. I did not want to read a long text message. Like, why are you sending me a novel through text? Pick up the phone and talk to me. And that became my norm until I was able to identify, this wasn't like me. Why am I doing this now? And so how the brain injuries create new behavioral patterns. Let's talk about that, because after a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, we're just going to say TBI for short, the brain often goes into this protection mode. It knows it needs help, so that's what it's doing. That's why you're having all those symptoms, right? And so this develops these new patterns. So we're going to talk about, there are 4 points that I want to talk about. What are those behavioral patterns that I have noticed in myself, and I'm working through them actively still, and I'm helping patients to heal and adapt, make sure that those patterns that they're acquiring, that they're adapting and and able to change them sooner than later. And so one of them, the very first one, is avoidance behavior. Guilty of that, man. You may unconsciously be avoiding things that you don't even, it's not because you're not aware of it. That's the problem. But when you are aware of, like, this is something I'm doing, then you can take that and start a new pattern, right? Because the brain is able to acquire, just the same way you acquired this bad behavior, you can acquire a new one that's better. So unconsciously, you might be avoiding busy environments. So if it's too many people, you might be avoiding social interactions, anything that's mentally demanding, like tasks that are mentally demanding, and also anything that seems overwhelming to you, which could be just about anything, to be honest. Talking about numbers, for me, it just created this anxiety. And so what happened is that my nervous system learned to silence the anxiety by avoiding giving it attention, and my mental attention and emotional attention, I learned to shut it down, not listen to it, and just avoid it. And then I didn't feel stress. I didn't feel anxiety. But the problem is you're not addressing the problem. You're not facing that task that you need, that it's important for you to face. So why does this happen? It's because your brain associated all of those environments and stimulus with it's overloaded. Your brain's overloaded. It's overwhelming, and so avoidance is the way to deal with it at the time. But when you heal from the brain injury, that is not the pattern to stay stuck in, because you start avoiding everything now, right? Anything that's overwhelming, we'll just put it on a back burner, and then you can get yourself into some real serious issues. The second thing that can lead a new pattern is the emotional amplification or blunting. So you may notice stronger emotional reactions than before, or the opposite. You might just feel numb and disconnected. And I'll tell you, sometimes you do start from the stronger emotional reaction, and then eventually you will switch to the opposite, which is that you'll numb yourself, you'll disconnect, and so that way you just don't feel it, right? Just like I said, if I disconnect from the anxiety of reading those emails and calls that I'm getting, answering all the calls, answering all these things, or dealing with the accounting and financial part of the business, I can just numb that, and then I avoid it. But that's not the way to cope with it, right? So this is going to reflect changes in how the brain is regulating your emotional processing, right? That amygdala is still fired up. Cognitive fatigue patterns. Oh my God. So you may start tasks, but struggle to finish them. Guilty. I would start things, I couldn't finish it. I would go to another part of my office, do that. And I had all of these things that I would start and wouldn't finish it. And that was frustrating to me, because I knew that wasn't me. I wanted to finish it to its completion, or I had all these great ideas, but I couldn't. I could start but not finish, or sometimes not even finish or even start them, right? So this is where you're going to notice that you're going to be procrastinating more, because cognitively you're just overwhelmed and you're just putting it off to a side, not finishing the task that you need to finish. And, mentally you feel exhausted quicker. So like reading the long email, like, I just can't. And then I wouldn't just not read that email that was important, right? Maybe it was an important email, and I would just I couldn't even read the rest. I would just, let me get off my phone. I often said that I wanted to throw my phone in the lakes of hell because everything comes through email, the messages, the texts, the calls, everything. And it was just so overwhelming. And I just wanted to disconnect from that and just get rid of it. So your brain is adapting, right? What it's doing in these situations of cognitive fatigue patterns is your brain is trying to conserve energy. It's protecting itself. The brain always wants to protect itself because it is highly important. It is the computer, right? The processor for the rest of the body. And so it wants to protect the brain by conserving energy. And sometimes it does it too excessively. And so you are procrastinating left and right. You got a PhD in procrastination and you hate it, because then as time goes by, there's going to be accumulation of these things that are going to start to come back and, start to impact you in ways that you're not happy with. The fourth thing, behavioral pattern, is this hypervigilance or anxiety, these loops of anxiety. So you may develop this heightened sense of awareness, fear of re-injury, overthinking or ruminating. So your brain is trying to still protect you, but it becomes too overprotective. It's like, remember, we got in that car accident. We got to be careful. And so then sometimes people don't want to drive through the place that they were in the accident or get on a freeway if that's where the accident happened. So it starts to affect that. And I'll tell you from personal experience, some people will switch off from the anxiety. You won't feel the anxiety after you've healed from the concussion. Sometimes you don't feel the anxiety anymore because you've been numbing and avoiding, right? But you do overthink things. You overthink and you ruminate. And that's where I would find myself annually, right, at the anniversary of the accident, like, why am I feeling these symptoms? Like, I thought I was healed. This happened 4 years ago. Even just last year, this happened to me. And I had to sit and have a conversation with God. Why is this happening? What do I still need to heal and let go? And you know what it was? I wasn't aware of these behavioral patterns. My brain was fine. Physically, I was fine. But I was not acknowledging the behavioral patterns. And it still took me another 4 or 5 months for me, right? Because that was May. So in September, after I had my therapy. So 4 months later, when I realized, oh, I've acquired some really bad habits after that concussion, and I'm stuck there. So how do I get myself unstuck, right? So how do you identify your post-injury behavioral patterns? Well, awareness is the first step to healing. And I really pray and hope that this conversation that I'm having with you is shining some light on your own behavioral patterns and realizing, like, oh, ever since that accident or that injury, I have been a huge procrastinator. And I am an avoidant, and I do feel numb, and I do experience these things, whatever behavioral pattern. And now you're aware. That's the first step to healing, is being aware that you have a problem, right? And so here's some specific things that you can, ways to identify what's changed. So 1, ask yourself, compare the before versus after. So ask yourself, what was easy for me before that? What was easy for me before that? Before now feels hard. So what was easy before that right now feels hard for me to do? When I went through this, I'm like, oh yeah, I was able to organize and respond to everything that was coming in. I would respond to things quickly. It was a phone call, I would address it. It was a text message, right away. It was an email, respond right away. Whatever, everything was organized and structured, and I had lost my marbles, guys, after that. Even after healing from the concussion, I still couldn't gather myself, right, structurally wise. So the other question is, how has my emotional baseline changed? I've noticed that some people, I've worked with some young people who've been in accidents. And, it's interesting with teenagers because they're going through hormonal changes, right? And so we just blame it. It's on the hormones. But it's not. If they had a concussion and they're a teenager, first of all, they're a teenager. They are going through hormonal changes. They're learning how to regulate, right? Self-regulate mentally and emotionally. And then third is also that their brain is still developing. So any inflammation in there is going to impact the development and the function of the brain. And now you have a concussion on top of that even when they heal a year or 2 years past that, they're still dealing with like rage. Like they can't regulate the emotion, down-regulate the response. So there's like this fire and rage because of, like I said, they're young and all those hormones. So their response is very strong, and it's most likely the concussion or the unhealed behavioral patterns that we acquire. So the other question you can ask when you compare the before and after is, do I react differently to stress? And it's going to be yes. For many people, it's yes. You do respond different to stress. You might be super hypervigilant about it, very sensitive about it, or you might just be like, hey, we're just going to not pay attention to that and be a complete avoidant of the stress, right? The second thing you want to identify is to track your triggers. So notice, when do you feel overwhelmed? Is it around crowded places? Maybe it's not a crowded place. Maybe it's loud. The sound, the light, the smells, scent, a lot of fragrances might impact you and feel overwhelmed. What situations drain you the fastest? Oh my God. Let me tell you, the past year, I've been identifying and struggling to identify what's draining me so fast. Why do I feel so tired? Even though I'm sleeping well, I'm doing all these things, it's great. And it wasn't all the time that I felt tired, right? So after I did that first session of the neural manipulation, that's when I was able to better reflect on these triggers. So I started to notice the situations that drain me the fastest. I'm sorry, but it was people who are too demanding, too much drama. It was really the personality of the individual. It was this neediness and constant demand. I can't be around people like that. Also, I noticed that people who would talk really fast and wouldn't like stop, like just really fast speakers. Like I was just like, I felt like my brain was being attacked, and then I would get drained from that. So I had to identify what people and what situations and environments drain me, so that for the moment, while I'm healing and changing the behavioral patterns, what do I need to do to remove myself from the situations, or how can I downregulate some of this and minimize the time that I'm exposed to those individuals? And then what environments feel unsafe or exhausting? So like I said, for me, anywhere where there's a lot of people, there was overstimulation. In the moment, I was fine sometimes, and sometimes I wasn't. I would have to leave. But then every time I would go home and just fall asleep. But never in my office, which was interesting. I would be in my office consulting with patients, and everything was fine. My energy, physically, mentally, was fine. The third thing you want to do is observe repeated patterns. So look for cycles like avoidance, guilt, overwhelm, shutdown. Or overexertion, you crash, and then you're frustrated, right? These loops are key clues. So I can tell you that for me, it was a lot of avoidance, then guilt, overwhelm, shutdown, and then you keep recycling, right, this pattern. You want to listen. The fourth part is you want to listen to your inner dialogue. Any post-TBI concussion thought patterns often include something like, I'm not the same person anymore. Like I changed, right? I can't handle this. It's too overwhelming. I can't focus. Or something's wrong with me and I don't know what it is. I can't seem to do what I used to do before. Ruminating, right? I can't seem to do what I used to do before. I struggle with it now. So I don't have the headaches. I don't have all the classic signs of a concussion. But now it's behavior. It's the behavior that needs to change, right? And I remember telling my husband, like, I feel like I acquired these new behaviors and I can't seem to undo them. And it's like you see the problem, but how do I get out of this problem? It feels like you're in a prison, to be honest with you. But these thoughts, are going to reinforce that behavioral pattern. So we need to make a shift, right? We need to make a shift there in terms of what do we do to create these new neural pathways for us to develop new behaviors. So there's communication between the brain regions that get disrupted, and we need to be able to connect that back. So remember that our nervous system can become very sensitive and reactive. So we want to make sure that we give the brain some opportunity to adapt to a new pattern. So you're not going to be the same person before the accident, I say you're going to be better than that, because you have this self-awareness of these patterns, but now you just have to change them. So the problem, like I said, is going to be the adaptations become those new patterns behavioral patterns that you adapted to now become automatic. And when you're in that automatic, you're operating, autopilot, that's when it's hard for you to realize that I'm procrastinating, I'm avoiding things left and right. So how do you go about it? So the brain doesn't just adapt, right? It's going to, like I said, it's going to go into automatic function. So over time, avoidance becomes a habit, anxiety becomes default by response, fatigue becomes an expectation. I'm just tired. You just justify it. And then the self-doubt becomes your identity, right? This, like I said, I constantly had to making decisions like, what do you think about this? Getting opinions from everyone. And let me tell you, since then, I just make decisions and run with it. And it's good because I feel confident. So when you do start to rewire the brain and develop a new behavior, and we're going to talk about the step, you start making those small steps. What happens after you achieve each small step, you really do build your confidence, and the emotion that goes behind the action and the thought is what's going to rewire your brain to develop a new habit. So we want to make sure that we get doing that. So if this is you, and let me tell you, even if you didn't have a concussion or a TBI, even people who are healing from trauma, the last episode I did it on leaving about toxic and abusive relationships and how it causes neuroinflammation. Well, anything that causes neuroinflammation will have you create new behaviors, new behavioral patterns, and you might get stuck in those patterns after you heal. So then you need to go back and rewire. So I want to talk about neuroplasticity, right? Because this neuroplasticity is this mechanism of change. The brain changes. It can change. It can alter at any age. And so your brain is going to operate on that principle of neuroplasticity. So what we want to do is, consider what you repeatedly do, what you repeatedly think, and what you repeatedly feel. This is what's going to, the consistency of that, it's what's going to create a new pathway. So every behavior you engage in is going to strengthen, like I said, that neural pathway. So if your current pattern are avoidance, overstimulation, negative self-talk, those pathways are going to be reinforced daily. But this is the key. The same mechanism that created those patterns is what we need to do to create a new pattern. So time alone, don't listen to, time will heal. No, time is not going to heal this. And I think that you can pray for this, but I do believe that your prayer is going to be strategic to helping you change your behavior, for your brain to be rewired, right? For God to help you change the way you think, the way you feel, and the way the things that you do, your behavior, because it is a behavior pattern. So how people are, many people are told, like, just get rest and give it some time and you'll get better. It doesn't go away. You've developed a new behavioral pattern. So we need to do something to change that around. So here's what we're going to talk about. Rewiring is going to require these 3 core ingredients. All right. I'm gonna say, before sharing these 3 ingredients, I really encourage you to consider something like neural manipulation, cranial sacral therapy, because if their structures are off, it's going to impact the way the brain is functioning. So, but these are some of the practical steps that you can take to change the behavioral patterns after a concussion, right? And you've developed these lingering new behaviors. So first is going to be that awareness. You cannot change what you cannot recognize. So you need to identify what pattern are you running. So I gave you some ideas of avoidance, procrastination, the emotional dysregulation, that sort of thing. What are the patterns that you are running right now? And when does it show up? So when are these situations that come up? Like I knew that when someone showed me financial statements, anything with accounting, bookkeeping, my brain was shut down. I just, even if I didn't, people maybe didn't see it in me, but internally, it was a very quick process that I would shut it down, avoid it, procrastinate, right? Which led to a lot of problems for me. And what triggers it, right? So what triggers it? When does it show up? What is the pattern that you're running? And because without having the awareness of that, the brain's just going to stay on autopilot. So you're calling it out. You're shining light on the problem. Now, what we're going to do is we have to interrupt that behavioral pattern. So once you see the pattern, now you can interrupt it. I don't know, when you were kids, you were riding your bike, your brother or sister would get a stick and put it in the wheel, and the bike would stop and people fall. Maybe that was just us growing up, but we did it all the time to each other. It's kind of like doing that. It's like taking a stick and just put it in the wheel and it stops. So you're going to do something to interrupt this behavioral pattern. And it's not going to be perfect, okay? Just give it. That's the other thing too, is sometimes people develop a behavioral pattern of, it has to be perfect before I can move forward. So this process is not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to be aggressive either. It's just enough to create a pause in that moment that you are having that behavioral response, right? So for an example is, if you're noticing that you are avoiding something, so you're in avoidance, maybe choose one very small action, just one small action. And then also you have to be able to catch the negative self-talk behind that little action that you have to do. So maybe, for example, I had to get in contact with the accountant. And so I would just put it off and put it off. And so, and I would avoid it. But now that I was aware of it, okay, I have to send this email to the accountant. And maybe there was this thought of frustration, like, I don't want to. Then I would say, stop. Let me pause. Let me take a deep breath. Let me interrupt my own thought and say, get on that email, start typing, do it. Just say, hey, I need to talk to you about this, whatever, and then just send it. And that action of stopping from being an avoidant and stopping the negative self-talk and then taking the action of actually doing what I needed to do already gave me a little boost of like, I did it. Like you had to, and then, I had to celebrate that I did it. So the feeling of overwhelm, you have to pause that instead of pushing through it. See, some of us are really good of pushing just through things. And this was a, no, let me stop. Let me give it the attention. Let me just do it. And then I'm going to be happy. So this is where the change is going to begin. Now, you can make a list of like the things, your priority, right? If you're avoiding or you're procrastinating, make a list of, don't make a long list. If you make a long list, forget it. You're overwhelming yourself. Sometimes I tell people, just pick one thing that you're going to do today, that you're going to give it the time and attention and energy that you haven't because you've been putting it off to a side. Just one thing today, and that's good enough. Now, if you could do 2 and 3, great, but at least one thing today, but you consistently, every day, you're doing something that's bringing you closer to completing and finishing the thing, giving the whatever necessary attention you need to that one thing. It starts to create a pattern of consistency, and it builds your confidence. You feel good, and you're happy, and you create a momentum that will continue to support this new neural pathway, right? So the next step is that you are doing repetition of a new pattern. That's how we acquire new behaviors, is the repetition of this new pattern. You have to be consistent. And as you're being consistent, you'll develop the discipline, and this will keep building over time. So this is very important. And it's also something that's overlooked a lot. So repetition of a new pattern, what does it look like? So your brain does not change from just insight. It changes from repetition, right? The more you do it, the easier it becomes, and then you just internalize it because you're making that neural pathway stronger every time you're doing it. It's reinforcing this new behavior. So you must be consistent with the practice the new behavior. Maybe it's taking 10 minutes in the morning to respond to emails and then just getting off, right? It's reinforcing the new thought. It's re-exposing yourself in a safe way. So, for example, one of the things that I was doing was I was avoiding responding to calls, like text messages. If somebody texts me, I would look at it. Sometimes I wouldn't even read it, and I would just put it off to a side. And before you knew it, I had a ton of text messages. So a couple years ago, I realized, okay, no, I'm gonna start owning this. And when a message comes in, my intention is gonna be to respond as quick as I can. However, if I'm with the patient, I'm doing something that I can't do that, I'm gonna give myself grace, but my intention is to if a message I receive, I'm going to respond as quick as I could. So over time, I developed, once again, that pathway of respond as a message comes in. Don't let it sit there for too long. And it works. So just going to summarize it. Awareness, interruption, and repetition of a new pattern. I'll put these in the description as well so you can see the notes there, what those are. And so this is... rewiring your brain will feel uncomfortable at first because you're moving out of a familiar pattern. That's normal. So it's a challenging protective mechanism that the brain does. It's like, hey, we've been doing this for so long. What are we doing now? But the brain adapts pretty quick. So you keep doing that new pattern, and then it'll just adapt to that, and it'll forget the old stuff you were doing. So just ask your brain to trust this new process. It's okay, we're doing this new thing, right? So that way you can start to make those changes. And now the new behavior, it's now familiar to you. This is the same thing when I tell people, if you want to start going to the gym, but you have a really hard time, pick the right time of the day, pick the days you're going to go to the gym, and what time works best for you. Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Is it night? And then pick a time. I'm going to only go for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Don't overwhelm yourself. Make it so easy that you could do it so that you can be consistent and you create this familiar pattern, this routine, and you repeat it over and over. And now you're solid in your workout schedule, right? But then we can deviate from that, and there we go. It's just rewiring. We got to go back to how we did it, which is that consistency, right? Repetitive and be consistent. So what are some things, let me see here, that I think before I wrap up here, that I think are important takeaways. I'm going to say give yourself some grace. Don't be so hard on yourself because you developed some pretty bad behaviors after an injury that probably wasn't your fault. But just acknowledge the problem, be aware of it, and then start interrupting that behavior and that thought and start taking those small steps. I'm going to tell you something else that really helped me to unlearn, reshape, rewire my brain. And that was talking about it out loud to somebody. I told my friend, I told my assistant, I told my husband, like, hey, I've noticed these behaviors. I know this is what's happening and I'm really struggling. And just talking about it with someone else, even if they didn't have insight or advice, it was something about talking about it out loud that I was hearing it myself and acknowledging this is a problem and I really have the desire to change it. And that is it. If you have the desire to change it, then change it, right? And start doing by those small steps, regulating the nervous system and then interrupting those behaviors. There's a lot more that I can go into and share, but I think that this is a good place to start. I'll put out those steps of what you should do to start acknowledging those behavioral patterns. But it's true. You will, if you don't acknowledge that, even if you had a concussion 10, 15 years ago, you can still rewire your brain. It doesn't matter how long it was ago. It's a behavior that you got stuck in, and you just need to develop a new one. So you need something to stimulate the brain to be able to rewire the brain and create a new behavioral process. So, hey, I just want to tell you that if you have suffered such an injury, it's not too late to heal from it. I really encourage the neural manipulation. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can definitely, reach out to my clinic, and I can talk to you a little bit more about it, set a session for it. It's really amazing. I do this on my patients a lot, and I always see how they heal through that so beautifully. And I was always telling them, like, I feel a little jealous because I can't find someone to do this to me. And so I was really grateful to find a great therapist that I can also receive the therapy. And now I just do it for maintenance purposes every month, at least once a month. And so at the beginning, people might just need to do, a couple sessions. It just really depends on the person. So I hope that this information has blessed your beautiful brain, and that, concussion or no concussion, this is still the way to change our behavioral patterns. So until next time, be blessed. Thank you for listening to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast. If you like what you've heard, please like, share, and subscribe. Help this message reach more people who may need to hear it. Leave your comments. I want to know what you think. If you're interested in learning more about Raíces, visit our website at raicesndmedcenter.com. Until next time, be blessed.